Hi there, and a very warm welcome to this week's video. For those of you who expected a cycles video, I have to apologize. So I planned out something really nice, at least I thought it was nice, but then it turned out to be a standard feature. So what we're going to do instead is take part 3 of our Octane noise series and have a look at how to mitigate noise during rendering. So without further ado, let's grab your coffee and let's keep going. Welcome and thank you very much for tuning back in. We are here in our trusted interior scene. By the way, let me know if you want to see some new scenes every once in a while or if you're just interested in the process and don't care. Okay, let's do the same thing that we did in last week's video and go over stuff I thought of in the meantime or was hinted at in the comments. The next thing is not so much about scene sampling, but rather the light source itself, and it has something to do with colors. So when we go and have very saturated colors in one spectrum, so red, green or blue, you can notice that the light source itself is becoming very noisy. You get better results by turning on ACES, for example. You can still see a little bit of noise here. And even more so by turning on HEX. I have a tutorial on that upper right corner if you're interested. But if you're stuck with sRGB, you can mitigate that a little bit by raising the colors and give the colors a little bit more play. So 0.05 for example in RNG, and you can see the light is becoming white and we don't have a noise problem anymore. Also, another method would be to use the Gaussian spectrum instead of the color. Sometimes the simplest scene makes for the best showcase, so what we have here is our light size example from the first video, where we have very poor sampling with small light sizes, and just to recap, if we increase the size, we get better sampling. What might not be as obvious because I didn't show it, this also goes for lights that don't have a physical size in the scene, so if we turn on our sunlight, we have a very small sunspot and therefore poor sampling here. But if we go inside of the tag and then increase the sun size to a whopping 30, you can see it has the same effect and the sampling now is a lot better. I also wanted to show you that with the direct light, so let's switch to the direct light, and it's basically a sunlight without the sun's color, so you can color it yourself and you can see very poor sampling. Now the reason why I say wanted, if we go to the tag and increase the light spread here, so let's also type in 30, you can see it's softer now like the sun, but the sampling doesn't really improve. And I don't know why this is. I hope Octane can fix that or improve that, but at least it's good to know that it is like this, so use those lights with caution. Alrighty, you made it through the recap, so let's talk business here with the render settings. There's no better way to start than with the first item here in the list with the render settings, and this is the render kernels. As with so many lists in Octane, this goes top to bottom, and the top is the fastest and the bottom is the slowest. Dependent on some situations, but usually roughly this is the case. Obviously, info kernels, what we are looking at right now, is rendering extremely fast, but it's not realistic at all. It's just not its purpose. But if we go one step further down, then we are starting with realism, kind of, with the direct lighting kernel. What you need to know about direct lighting, and this is also the reason why this scene is looking a bit strange right now, is two things. It doesn't render GI if you not explicitly tell it so. So the reason this is looking this way is because we are looking at ambient occlusion, and also the environment is bleeding through. Let me show you by going to the AO distance, which by the way is measured in meters, and set this here to 0. And it's very much looking like the info kernel, because now all the lighting in the scene that is caused by an HDRI, or in our case the sky, is bleeding through. You can make this look somewhat decent by going to the AO distance and dialing it in. I already know about the value that I would use, but still you can see that this is no proper light support, for example on the dark edge on the door frame here. Another really important point about the direct lighting kernel is that it doesn't use caustics whatsoever, and as we've learned in the other parts, caustics are responsible for fireflies or hot pixels, If you don't need any caustics, you can misuse or you can just use the direct lighting kernel to come close to path tracing, but without casting caustics. What you would do is turn on GI diffuse to get indirect lighting here, then increase the indirect lighting depth to maybe 5 to 8. 8 is the maximum here. Also, you might increase the glossy depth to a higher value and maybe the specular depth as well, dependent on your scene. Like last time, I pre-rendered some results, so what you're seeing here is the direct lighting and it took 25 seconds for 2K samples per pixel. One note though, I had to turn off the glass in the windows, otherwise it would have resulted in this here and it's much too dark. But let's compare it to the path tracing. So this is the direct lighting, this is the path tracing, and yes, the path tracing has a little bit more dynamic, but overall they're very similar, but also very similar in render time, so 25 seconds to 28 seconds for the path tracing. And one minor detail, because I mentioned it before, the path tracing has fireflies, whereas the direct lighting has not. Because it gives such a naturalistic feeling and you can deal with fireflies in other ways, I usually use path tracing for my renders. And when it comes to the other kernels, for example photon tracing, this is a kernel that is made for caustics and fast caustic rendering, and PMC is made for finding light sources that are hidden in the scene. I would say those are very specialized kernels for their individual use cases, and personally I never use PMC. In most of the cases, it's just slow and noisy. So let's go with path tracing and explore techniques to make this kernel faster. Welcome back to our block caustic scene. As we've established before, caustics can cause excessive noise and fireflies. So let's have a look at a couple of methods to reduce this noise. If you have watched last week's video about reducing noise in materials, we established that the contribution energy is a huge factor here. Basically, caustics are just high energy samples. So what we can do is go to our material here and lessen the contribution strength and therefore get less caustics, obviously. Of course, this changes the look of our material, which we don't want. So we can do it another way by going to the GI clamp.
The clamps! Right?
Let's demonstrate this by giving it a value of 10, and you can see now the caustics are less pronounced and therefore they render more easy and with less noise. The lower you go, the more you stray from reality, but the less noise the caustics will produce. You can still see caustics or fireflies inside of the glass, and this is because the clamp only cares for indirect diffuse. Let's go into a chart time to explain this more in depth. Okay, we have all seen this before, we have been here. What's new here is the explanation. So when we shoot rays into the scene throughout our camera, they are bouncing around all over the place and they can find the light source. As established in the previous videos, we also need rays that are exploring the scene. So every once in a while the ray hits a diffuse surface and then bounces off in a random fashion. And those are the only rays where the GI clamp is true. If you think about it, this is a good way to do this because we don't want to take away direct light energy. Also, we don't want to take away energy from direct reflections, so whatever we see on this end, we don't want to clamp those. We only want to reduce caustics or the energy that is put through them. And caustics are coming from the random rays that are shot in all sorts of directions and then randomly find the light source and therefore get a high energy on this point. So if we clamp those, if we cap the energy that can be moved through this point, then we can make the render less noisy, but also move further from the reality, in that we are removing energy from the scene that should usually be there. But those indirect rays not only count for caustics, but also for the usual GI, which means indirect lighting in your scene, so you have to be a bit careful how low you go with the GI clamp. Otherwise, that can lead to scene darkening. Small bonus round because a lot of people don't think about this. So if you have fireflies in volumes, this comes from the light being inside of the volume. So near the light, there's a really high amount of energy that is distributed throughout. And what do you know? The GI clamp also works here. So if I set this to 10 and then leave it render for the same amount of samples, would you look at this? All the fireflies are gone. Welcome back to our boxy scene. So before I forget, I usually use GI clamp values from 5 to 10, but let's set it back to 1000. By the way, the real default is 1 million, but 1000 is good enough. So now that we are back to square one, let's talk about the value just above the GI clamp, which is the Caustic Blur. Let's do another throwback to material noise reduction time. So what I said there was if we are going to get a roughness here, then the rays will disperse, which also disperses energy, and therefore we get less noise. But obviously that also alters the look of the material, so let's get back to 0. And you can already think what this is doing. So when we alter the blur here, let's go with 0.2. You can see now for the indirect rays, this object looks blurry. Basically, what you set here, this blur, is also added on top of whatever blurriness or roughness your object has to the indirect rays. You might also have seen that the standard here or the default value is 0.02 and we already get a lot of noise, so let's have a look what 0 looks like. Oh yes, we get a lot of fireflies now. This is hot pixel galore. While we are at it, and my statement still stands, sometimes the simplest scenes are the most effective, at least to show stuff. Let's have a look at a tool that I very seldomly use, and this is in the imager, the hot pixel removal tool. I have no idea why, but the value of 1 means that it's turned off. My philosophy here is only use it if the aforementioned tools fail and don't do anything good. And with a single bright pixel, this works rather well. So let's go to the kernels and set the Caustic Blur to 0.02 again. Then go back to the imager, and when we introduce it now, you can see it produces some artifacts. Especially if we turn it down to 0, you can see it's becoming a bit blurry. It is basically the same as with all tools. You have to handle it with care and know what you're doing. If I'm using it, I'm using values between 0.25 and 0.7 or something like this. Let me introduce you to an old new scene that I refurbished for this tutorial, and that will also be on my Patreon. If you become a member here, no matter what tier, you have access to a lot of scene files that I use inside of my tutorials, as well as the videos without commercials. Also, if you're already a Patreon, you might have not noticed, but we have a community here with chat functions. I just wanted to mention this because people are usually surprised that this exists and they never heard of it before. Now, back to our scene. The next one is also a bit of a mixed bag, like the light portals were in the former video. And funny enough, this also has to do with lights. What I'm talking about is the AI light feature. What I found is, and we have two different scenes with takes inside of here, so we have spotlights, that AI light really works well with spotlights and doesn't work well with mixed light scenarios. So let's have a look in pre-rendered scenes. Before we do, let's go through our lights so you can see what we're doing here. So we have a fluorescent light and a room light. Those are both bigger light sources. And then we have a spotlight here. And basically, we don't care about our environment light because it's relatively weak. So when we look at our renders, and let me actually zoom in here to a spot back there, and we render without AI, and then we turn on AI, we can see that actually it does the opposite. It gets more noisy. If we look at the light path directly, you can see that even better. Here we go, without width. But what you can also see, if we go to the corner here where we can see our spotlights, this is the spotlight path for the same rendering. So this is without, and we can see a lot of noise here. And this is with AI light, and you can see the noise is almost gone. In this slide, I exchanged all the lights for spotlights. So if we zoom into our normal render, you can see there's quite some inherent noise here, for example. And then if we jump to our AI render, you can see it's almost gone. And this goes for almost every part of the scene. So this is the normal render. You can see the noise down here. And this is with AI light. Let's switch to the floor here. Normal render, we have quite some noise here. AI light, no noise at all, or just very little of it. This means if your scene is consisting mainly of spotlights, then AI light can really help your scene to get noise free. Why not stay in the scene for our next setting, which is the adaptive sampling. Usually this is one set it and forget it setting. If we set it, we can have a look at our noise layer here. The green parts in our scene are actively turned off from rendering because they are underneath the threshold and therefore considered noise free. So the sampler has more headroom to render the really noisy parts. I have made a tutorial about this in my very early days. If you care to watch it, it's in the upper right corner. And last but not least, maybe to some of your surprise, also a feature that I not really often use is the imager and then the AI denoiser. There's not a lot you can do to that, so we can enable it and it should pop up right here, so the denoised main pass. And it will be denoised when it's finished. If you don't want to wait, you can denoise on completion, turn that off, then it will be denoised every once in a while. But we can look at it right now, and you can see that it's rather splotchy. So the denoiser works with the shit in, shit out principle. So if your input is bad, then your output will obviously be also bad. A really good way to see that is with our box. So if we denoise that, there's a lot of uncertainty and therefore a lot of splotches here. So all the settings that we did before also helped the denoiser. So if we up the Caustic Blur to 0.2 and then render and then let it denoise, you can see that there is a lot less splotchiness on the same area. If you want to render denoised animations, unfortunately the denoiser in Octane is not temporal. That means it calculates every frame on its own and it doesn't interpolate. This means that the splotch pattern is different in every frame and therefore there's flickering. The obvious thing to do is to increase your samples and therefore provide your denoiser with more information. Another way to help your denoiser not flicker is to keep your information constant. What I mean is when we scroll down here, you can see the static noise. If we tick that, Octane tries to render the same noise pattern in every frame, which obviously helps the denoiser to make the same assumptions every frame. But don't leave it on for non-denoised results, otherwise your renders will look like as if they were shot through a dirty window. In the upcoming 2024 version of Octane, you also have access to the Intel denoiser. This is not implemented in the current stable version. You can watch this video in the upper right corner where I show some of it. I know that there are a couple of more tips and tricks I could give you with render settings, but those are the biggest ones. Let's go over the main points here real quick again. So in the first chapter for the lights, we learned let's make the lights as big as possible. That also goes for HDRIs and sunlights. If possible, don't place the light near objects and make it accessible to most of the scene. When it comes to materials, make them physically correct. Don't use too bright values or too saturated values. And for reflections and refractions, a little roughness can go a long way to make your scene appear more even and less noisy. In this part, we have gone over the same structural things. To reduce noise, lower your energy or spread your energy. We just applied it on the rendering level instead of the material level. Besides that, there's a whole shelf full of tools that can help you reduce noise additionally, mainly adaptive sampling, maybe AI lights, it's a bit of a mixed bucket, and also the denoiser, of course. Before I thank my Patreons for making this video possible, let's go with our mantra again. Intent comes for optimization, which means if your scene starts looking different, then go with what's in your head rather than to optimize, of course, if you have the rendering power at hand. And now, finally, without further ado, let's thank our Patreons. Especially my €50 tier subscribers, Shields Augustinen, Just a Frickin', and Leon Studio TV. Also, of course, a huge thank you for my €15 tier subscribers, Render King, Alessandro Bonchio, Alessio De Vecchi, Bavana, BVR, Chris Fritchie, Christian Grajewski, Erbe Plus Academy, George Luna, Graham Bucknell, Joel Muckimer, John Edward, Chris Clemson, Ludger, Muradan Axos, Nico Straub, Part 1 of 2, Kuok An Dang, Raiko, Renato Marquez, Reshock, Shamus Johnson, Shiro 2049, Tagori M. Vilela, Terry Wayne Ranson, Touch My Render, and Yasin Rupp. Thank you all so very much for making it possible to produce those videos that you all enjoy. Alrighty, I think the scrubbing has paid off and everything is clean and tidy now. Thank you very much for joining me in the after party. I honestly enjoy those conversations sparked from here. Also, this must be a new record. It took me almost 13 hours to record and edit this 20-minute video. Of course, preparation not included. If you want to show your support, this time it's on you to show what emoticon you will choose. So as always, I hope you liked it, you find something useful in it, and have a great rest of your weekend and an amazing start into next week. So I say thank you very much and happy tweaking. Bye.